Now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you, Madam President. We wish to thank Martin Griffiths for the assessments provided. Colleagues, I think it will be no exaggeration to assert that in the context of the issue under discussion today, we are all concerned first and foremost about the question of the future of the cross-border mechanism for humanitarian assistance deliveries to Syria, which is set to expire this July. Today, we have heard, and we will probably continue to hear, statements and views about the importance of this mechanism for Syrian refugees and the need for its extension and even expansion of it. You are aware of the fact that our views on this and our assessments differ, and we cannot overlook the following fact. This cross-border mechanism, if we are to call a spade, constitutes a violation of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Nonetheless, 1 year ago, we allowed you to persuade us of the need to maintain this mechanism until deliveries across the line of contact are fully operational. So, in this way, Security Council Resolution 2585 was adopted. This resolution contains a number of other elements, including support for early recovery projects. However, from the very beginning of implementation of the resolution's implementation was stymied. It also became immediately clear as to why this happened. Quite simply, colleagues, none of you wanted to take to assume responsibility for the necessary work with the Idlib terrorists for them to stop sabotaging the cross-line convoys. Essentially, only in January, before the 6-month extension, you reconsidered and you began to persuade us of the presence of positive trends on the ground which needed to be supported. We tried to step into your shoes, to see things your way, and agree to extend this mechanism for another 6 months with a large down payment, so to speak. And what do we see now? In principle, we are back at square one. If we're to talk about the establishment of sustained humanitarian deliveries from Damascus, specifically Idlib, then the result of 4 cross-line convoys over the course of the year can hardly be called successful. Descriptions about the lack of necessary security in the region for the passage of the 2 convoys arise solely in the context of cross-line deliveries. In turn, nothing is preventing the continuous passage of goods across Bab al-Haba checkpoint, even if when the mechanism ends, there are 6 or 7 convoys still, then this will not change the picture. We do not see any systemic efforts in this area, despite the high need set out in the resolution on 2585 for early recovery projects, the need to provide normal conditions for Syrians for life and their livelihoods. At the present juncture, we cannot but welcome the intention of the United Nations to extend this work. Ms. Martin Griffiths repeatedly spoke out in support of stepping up efforts in this area. For, in fact, the cumulative effect of post-conflict recovery for core infrastructure to enhance the resilience of Syrian society on the whole can generate considerable savings for donors. Martin, we support you fully in this, and we regret the fact that basic logic about the need for humanitarian recovery in Syria is not supported by donors, including those countries who signed on to Resolution 2585. The main problem runs counter to the principles of the work of the United Nations. The main problem is that implementation of early recovery and reconstruction projects continues to be made contingent on donor countries' political considerations. To our deep regret, the United Nations is having difficulties resisting this pressure. A stark example of this was the shameful internal guidelines of the Secretariat, the parameters and principles of UN humanitarian assistance in Syria, which include political conditions, and this was not revoked. Colleagues, I will be frank. In your efforts to safeguard the mechanism at any cost, you increasingly resemble the parents of a lazy, negligent student who is threatened with suspension from school. The parents who are begging that his attendance at school be extended for another school year. As you know perfectly well from your own life experience, nothing good, as a general rule, comes of such spoiled children. And you are doing everything possible, contrary to the facts, for some reason obstinately attempting to portray your student as an excellent student. The selection of one of the briefers for today's meeting, unfortunately, is a striking example of this. We have already mentioned and told you on a number of occasions that throughout discussions on the situation in the terrorist enclave in Syria and the one-sided relationship of some members, to put it mildly, has been protracted. You are at all costs trying to maintain this awkward, even awkward for you, status quo. You are not proposing any solutions nor ideas to accommodate the legitimate demands of Damascus. We cannot accept this situation. We cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that HTS terrorists, which have been recognized as such by the international community, have usurped power, manipulated humanitarian assistance, and if there's necessary will, deliveries of such assistance can be established from Damascus. However, you have not shown this will, and you leave us with no reason to maintain the cross-border mechanism. And representatives of al-Nusra are openly asserting that they will not allow humanitarian cargo to pass through from Damascus to the detriment of cross a border. As for the 3 Turkish operations zones in the north of Syria, internal deliveries have not yet begun, and this despite the fact that Damascus promptly grants all the requests of the United Nations. Madam President, nor can we fail to mention that the UN continues to circumvent the issue of the devastating consequences of illegitimate unilateral sanctions of the EU and US on Syria's economy and the delivery of humanitarian assistance to it. Ultimately, ordinary civilians become hostages. They are stripped of access not just to their oil resources, but also to agricultural areas, which once fed the entire region. Washington has occupied these Syrian lands and essentially has now manually, for all this time, been deliberately creating famine and hunger in the country which was once food independent. On 12 May, the U.S. Treasury issued General License 22, which provides access to northwest and northeast Syria for private investors from abroad. This effectively legalizes Washington's plundering of Syrian grain from the areas beyond the Euphrates. We regret the fact that the United Nations leadership for all this time was unable to find an opportunity to comment on this illegal activity of the United States in Syria, including yesterday when we discussed matters of food security around the world. And at the same time, reversing this situation, which runs counter to international law, would simplify the lives not just of many Syrians, but also their neighbors who Syria, prior to the U.S. intervention, to whom the U.S. sold food surpluses. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Russian Federation for their statement.